Well now, are you settled? If so, then let's do our little trick. Keep your eyes slightly open, not watching, just letting the room soften and lose its certainty. Let the space around you feel quieter, as if it's slowly stepping back. And you'll find that the longer you try to stay awake, the sooner sleep will find you. Sink down into the bed beneath you. Let it take your weight completely until staying still feels easier than moving. Breathe gently and remain where you are. And if you hear a slow shuffling sound somewhere in the house, don't respond. As long as you stay calm and unmoving, it won't single you out. Now, let's begin tonight's stories. The thing moved through the village while people slept. It kept low to the ground. It didn't scrape against stone or timber unless it had to. When it passed a wall, it did so with care. When it crossed a yard, it left marks where its weight pressed into the earth, but no sound that would carry through windows or wake a dog curled under a table. By morning, it was gone. The village woke as it always did. Smoke rose from chimneys, doors opened. The first people out noticed nothing until they reached the square and saw that one of the houses was missing its front. Charlie Cannon's house stood open to the street as if a section of it had been removed whole. The edges of the break were blackened and still warm. The stone wasn't cracked or scattered. It looked as though it had been cut away and then taken with it. Where the wall had been, the remaining stone glowed faintly purple in the low morning light. No one remembered hearing anything in the night. Inside, the house was exposed from floor to ceiling. Furniture lay where it had always been. Nothing else appeared disturbed. There were no signs of struggle, no broken tables or scattered tools. The bed was still against the far wall, but on that bed was blood. There was only one part of Charlie left. From the knee down, his right leg lay twisted in the bedding. The rest of him was gone. People gathered in the street and stood without speaking, some crossing themselves, others backing away. No one went inside at first. When the guards arrived later in the morning, they stepped carefully through the opening and looked around the house, then at the marks outside. They couldn't explain what they saw. Along the street, deep grooves cut across the cobbles, as though something heavy had been dragged through them. On the walls of nearby houses, stone was scored in long, uneven lines. At the corner of the square, a wooden gate had been split clean through. The cut was darkened with the same faint purple heat still visible where the wood had burned. No animal anyone knew could have done it. Charlie Cannon had lived alone. His wife had died years earlier. He worked in his land behind the house and tended a lime kiln in the lower field at the edge of the village. He wasn't known to quarrel with anyone. He kept to himself and paid his debts. No one could think of a reason why his house alone had been taken. By midday, the guards had closed the street. People spoke in low voices. Some said it must have been a gang passing through. Others said it was a wild animal from the hills. No one could agree on what kind. Charlie's sister, Moira, arrived that afternoon. She had been sent for when the guards realized there was no one else to notify. She stood in the street and looked at what remained of her brother's house without crying. When she was allowed inside, she walked slowly through the rooms and touched nothing. Later, she asked to see the kiln. The kiln stood beyond the village, near a shallow dip in the land where smoke wouldn't drift back toward the houses. Charlie had built it himself years earlier. It was a simple stone structure, round and waist-high, with an opening at the front and a pit beneath where the ash fell. The guards went with her. The kiln had been broken open from the side. The stones weren't scattered, they'd been pushed inward as if crushed by force. The inside of the kiln was blackened. The ash was still warm. Along the rim and inside the pit, the same dull purple glow clung to the stone. Before anyone stepped closer, one guard spoke. He explained how a lime kiln worked because there had already been talk and he wanted it understood plainly. Shells, he said, were used because they were made of lime. People gathered them from the shore, oyster shells, mussel shells, any that could be broken and stacked. They were burned at high heat until they turned to powder. The powder was used for mortar, for whitewash, for the fields. It was common practice along the coast and inland where shells could be brought in. Charlie had collected his shells himself. He walked the beach when the tide was out and filled sacks with whatever he found. Moira listened without speaking. When she stepped closer and looked down into the ash pit, she saw bone. At first she thought it was a form of animal Charlie had burned by mistake. Then she saw the shape of the skull. It was small. The eye sockets were narrow and set forward. The jaw was long, with rows of fine teeth. The bones were thin and pale, untouched by the heat that had reduced everything else to ash. There was more beneath it, small rib cages, curved spines, limbs with too many joints, all of them perfectly preserved, lying together in the ash as if they had been placed there deliberately. No one spoke. The guards looked at one another, then back at the kiln. One of them stepped away and was sick in the grass. Moira didn't move. Charlie had burned shells in that kiln the night before he died. She knew because she'd spoken to him 2 days earlier. He had told her he was nearly finished with the batch and would rest once it was done. Charlie had gathered shells from the beach the week before. Word spread quickly after that. People remembered seeing Charlie on the shore, filling his sacks. They remembered him loading them onto his cart. Someone said they'd noticed the shells were more abnormal than usual, more oval-shaped, like eggs. By evening, no one doubted what had happened. Stories were told of creatures that laid their eggs in damp sand near the water, creatures that lived long lives and returned to the same place again and again, creatures that didn't forgive. They spoke of the Alafest. No one said the name aloud at first. When they did, it was only once. The Alafest was said to be large and scaled, with claws strong enough to tear stone. It moved between land and water and left little trace unless it chose to. It was said to be slow to anger, but relentless once roused. Charlie Cannon hadn't known what he'd gathered. He hadn't known what he burned, but that didn't matter. By nightfall, the guards had left. There was nothing more they could do. The street was quiet again. People barred their doors and kept their lamps lit. No one slept well. Charlie's house was left open. No one would enter it again. In the days that followed, the marks in the street remained. The purple glow faded slowly from the stone. Grass refused to grow where the creature had passed. Charlie's field lay empty. His kiln was dismantled and buried. No one went near the shore for weeks. Moira left the village before the month was out. She took nothing with her but a small box of Charlie's papers. She didn't look back at the house when she went. Years later, people still spoke of that night Charlie Cannon was taken. They said the village had been spared because only one debt had been owed. They said the creature had taken what it came for and nothing more. They also said that the shells on the beach near that place were never gathered again. and when people passed the lower field at night, they did so quickly and without stopping. Roddy Glynn had been on the post for 3 whole weeks, which meant he was still doing the job the way the rulebook imagined it was done. He checked every parcel twice, he kept his cap clean, he drove carefully as if the van were made of thin glass and the whole country had been waiting for him personally to put a dent in it. The older lads in the sorting office had stopped watching him after the first week. They had decided he was either going to last or he was going to crack, and either way it wasn't their business. It was late afternoon when he reached the end of his route. The light had that soft spring look to it, bright but not warm, and the wind carried a smell of turned soil and damp hedges. He pulled up at the last gate, killed the engine, and checked the back. There were no letters left in his bag, no parcels on the shelf, no forgotten bundle under the seat. He stood there a second longer than needed, just to enjoy the small relief of being finished, and then he saw it. It sat in the far back corner of the van, tucked against the panel, as if it had been placed there carefully. It wasn't like the other parcels. There was no label, no stamp, no printed anything. It was wrapped in thick brown paper, the sort of paper you only saw in old shops now, tied with twine and sealed with a deep red wax stamp. It looked wrong in the van. It looked like something that belonged in a dresser drawer under old shirts with a smell of mothballs and forgotten secrets. Roddy stared at it. He wasn't sure it hadn't been there earlier. He was also sure he would have noticed it if it had. The van wasn't big, and he wasn't the sort of man who missed a parcel. He leaned in and lifted it. It had weight, not the heavy, solid weight of a lump of metal and not the shifting weight of grain. No, it felt like it was holding something that knew exactly how much it weighed and was happy to remain that way. He brought it forward and set it on the passenger seat for convenience, the way every postman did when he had one last drop and didn't want to climb into the back again. As he closed the door, he heard a sound, a little scrape, a tiny movement, like a fingernail dragged across paper. He froze with the keys in his hands, listening. Nothing followed. He told himself it was the twine settling, the paper creasing, the van cooling. He started the engine and pulled back onto the road. The lane wound through fields and hedgerows. It was the kind of road where a man could drive for a mile and see nobody but cows, and even the cows looked like they'd been standing there since the beginning of time, out of habit. He drove a short distance before the van made a sound like a cough it had been holding in all day. The engine juddered. The steering went heavy in his hands. Roddy eased it to the side of the road, and it died on him with no ceremony whatsoever. The whole van gave one last shiver and fell quiet. He tried the ignition again. The engine turned, half-hearted, and then it stopped. Another try, and it gave him a little whine that sounded personally offended. He sat there with both hands on the wheel, staring at the hedge. He was miles from town. The nearest cottage he could see was a tiny speck of white, far off, tucked behind a rise. He looked at the parcel on the passenger seat. It sat there like it belonged, like it had been riding beside him for years and had always known where it was going. He listened again. A faint sound came from it, something like a soft chuckle muffled by paper. It might have been nothing. It might have been the wind sliding through the twine. Roddy swallowed hard and reached for the door handle. "All right," he muttered, mostly to himself. "Looks like I'm walking." He took the parcel under his arm. It fit there too well, like the paper had been wrapped with that exact carry in mind. He stepped onto the road and closed the van, giving it a look that promised consequences later. He started walking. The lane bent and climbed, the light shifted as clouds moved across the sun. A few birds called from the hedges, and somewhere a cat called in the distance, bored and half asleep. He walked for maybe 5 minutes before he stopped and looked down at the parcel again. There was still no address, no name, no townland, no house number, no nothing. He turned it slowly in his hands. That was when he heard the scribbling. It was clear as day, the scratch of something writing across paper. The sound came from the parcel itself, right under his fingertips. Roddy jerked it away from his chest and stared at it. Letters were appearing on the brown paper, dark and clean, in old-fashioned handwriting. The ink looked fresh, as if it had just been dipped. Left after the hill. He stared until his eyes started to water. He looked up at the lane ahead. There was a rise not far on, a gentle hill that hid what lay beyond. He looked back down. The ink was still there, steady and certain. He ran his thumb over it. Dry, no smudge, no smear. Roddy breathed out slowly through his nose and held the parcel tighter, as if it might wriggle away if he didn't. "All right," he said again, and his voice sounded too loud in the quiet lane. "Left after the hill, so." He walked on. When he reached the hill, he climbed it and came to a split in the road. One path slanting left, narrow and rough, the other continuing straight on toward a line of trees. He took the left. As he walked, more writing appeared, one line after another, each time that same scratch of invisible pen. Over the next stone wall, keep your eyes down. Don't speak to the woman who cries. Roddy stopped at that last one. The lane ahead dipped into a hollow. The hedges grew taller. The air seemed cooler there, as if the sun had decided the place was none of its concern. He looked down at the parcel. Don't speak to the woman who cries. He shifted the parcel in his arms and continued, slower. The hollow held sound differently. His boots scuffed the gravel, and it felt like the noise went up into the hedges and stayed there. And then he heard it. A low, wavering cry far ahead. It rose and fell, thin as thread, and it made the hair on his arms stand. He kept walking. The crying grew clearer. It wasn't a baby. It wasn't a normal woman either, the kind you heard at a funeral. It sounded like something that had been crying for a very long time and had learned how to do it without stopping. He rounded a bend and he saw her. She stood near the hedge, half on the road and half off it, as if she hadn't decided where she was allowed to exist. Her hair hung loose. Her dress looked pale, almost gray. She didn't turn to face him. She was too busy combing the ends of her hair. Roddy's mouth opened on instinct. It snapped shut again. He kept his eyes down, like the parcel had told him. He washed the stones and the mud and his own boots. He held the parcel tight to his chest and walked past her without looking up. The crying rose sharply as he passed, like it had noticed him. He felt the sound press against his back. He felt it searching him like a hand hovering an inch above his skin. He walked on. The crying fell away behind him, thank God, and the hollow became warm again. The air loosened. Roddy didn't stop until he reached the top of the next rise and could no longer hear it at all. He looked down at the parcel. New ink was forming. Good. Don't look back. He didn't look back. He kept walking. The road narrowed. Fields gave way to scrub and bracken. The hedges grew untidy, thorny, full of dark gaps that looked like mouths. The parcel shifted once, a subtle movement, and he felt it like a twitch against his ribs. He stopped. He listened. A faint whisper came from the paper, not words he could make out, more like several voices trying to talk at once through cloth. He took one careful step forward. The whispering stopped. He took another. It started again, softer. Roddy frowned, then realized the parcel was doing something that made no sense at all, and so naturally it was doing it perfectly. It wasn't reacting to his fear, it was reacting to his direction, the way a compass reacts to the idea of north. He followed the pull. He crossed the stone wall where the parcel had told him, finding an old gap hidden under the briars, the kind of gap made by people who didn't want to be seen using it. On the other side, the land dipped into a small bunch of trees. The branches were bare enough to let light through, but dense enough to feel enclosed. The ground was soft underfoot, twigs snapped quietly, and the air smelled of damp bark and last year's leaves. He saw the webs then. They were strung between the trees at head height, thick as twine, glistening faintly as the light caught them. Some were low, some were high, and some formed a curtain across the narrow path. Roddy stopped. He looked down at the parcel. The scribbling came quickly this time, short and sharp. Slow steps, don't touch the silk, keep the parcel close. He shifted the parcel higher in his arms and took one careful step. A web trembled nearby as if his movement had disturbed the air. He took another step. Something moved above him. He didn't look up at first because looking up in a webbed wood felt like a good way to meet something face to face that had been waiting for that exact mistake. But his eyes went there anyway, creeping up on their own. A spider clung to a branch. Bigger than any spider had a right to be. Its legs were long and pale, like bone. Its body was dark and glossy. It watched him without moving. He took another step, slow. The spider moved, quick as a blink, and dropped onto a web line directly in front of him, hanging at chest height. Roddy stopped so abruptly his heels sank into the soft ground. The spider hung there, swaying slightly, as if it had been placed carefully for him to see. He held his breath, waiting. The spider's legs flexed. It shifted its weight, and the web line gave a tiny shiver. Roddy's arms tightened around the parcel. He didn't run. There was nowhere to run without hitting a web. He took one slow step sideways. The spider followed him, not moving along the line, but swinging, keeping itself between him and the path. The parcel made a sound. Deep inside it, a soft, amused little noise, as if it found this arrangement entertaining. Roddy swallowed. He took another slow step. The spider swung again and came closer. He could see the fine hairs on its legs. He could see the shine of its eyes. He looked down at the parcel desperately. Fresh ink appeared, calm as anything. Wait. He waited. The spider hung there for a long moment. Then, slowly, it drew itself upward, vanishing into the shadow of the branch like it had never been. The webs in front of him trembled again, and the gap opened, threads parting as if two unseen hands were pulling them aside. Roddy moved through, slow, careful, parcel clamped to his chest, and as he passed the last web, he heard the scribbling again. Do not thank them. Roddy didn't, though his whole body wanted to say something, anything to break the silence in his throat. He left the trees and stepped out onto open ground. The light had shifted while he was under the trees. The sun sat lower, and the fields were taking on that long shadow look that told you evening was on the way, whether you liked it or not. The lane ahead was unfamiliar. It wasn't the sort of road he'd ever seen on a map. It wandered between low hills, disappearing and reappearing with stone walls that ran on like old arguments. Roddy walked. The parcel grew heavier, then lighter, then heavier again, as if it was measuring his patience. At one point, he heard a soft chuckle from inside it again, and this time it sounded like more than one voice sharing a joke. He glanced down sharply. A new line had appeared. Keep walking. He snorted, half in fear, half in disbelief. All right, he said quietly. You don't have to be so cheeky about it. The parcel didn't answer. It didn't need to. The writing was its answer. He followed the directions as they came. Past the hawthorn, don't touch the tree. He passed a hawthorn standing alone in a field, its branches twisted, its shape wrong in a way he couldn't quite explain. The wind moved through it, and he heard a faint rustle that could have been leaves, but there were no leaves. Down to the water, keep to the right, bank. He followed a narrow stream, water dark and slow, the ground slick with mud. He slipped once and caught himself, parcel held high, heart hammering. The ink appeared again. Don't drop it. He glared at the parcel as if it had personally pushed him. The whispering inside it rose briefly, then faded like a crowd settling after a joke. He walked on. The next obstacle wasn't a creature at first. It was a silence. The lane dipped again and the air went still. Even the birds seemed to have decided this was none of their concern. Roddy slowed. His boots made no sound. The gravel underfoot felt oddly soft. He looked down at the parcel. The scribbling came in a hurried line. Don't call out. If you hear your name, keep moving. His skin prickled. A voice came from the hedge to his left, low and clear. Roddy. He stopped so fast he nearly tripped. The voice said it again, softer. Roddy Glenn. He stared at the hedge. There was a gap in it, a darkness between thorns. He could swear something shifted inside that gap, as if a face had leaned close and then pulled back. His mouth opened. He remembered the parcel's words. He shut it again. He walked forward, faster, keeping his eyes on the lane. The voice followed. Roddy. It sounded like someone trying to get his attention, politely, in a ghostly sort of way. He felt his throat tighten. He kept walking. The voice grew sharper. Roddy, come here. He didn't turn. He didn't look. He held the parcel like it was the only solid thing in the world. The voice stopped. In its place, he heard a soft shuffling in the hedge, as if something had stepped away, disappointed. The ink appeared again. Good boy. Roddy stopped dead. He stared at the parcel. That's a bit much, he said under his breath, and his voice shook despite him trying to keep it steady. The parcel made a faint movement, like a shrug. He walked on. The countryside grew emptier. The fields widened. The stone walls rose higher. The sky ahead turned a cooler shade as the sun lowered behind the hills. Roddy realized he hadn't seen a house in a long time. Not a smoke plume, not a light in a window, not even the suggestion of a farmer in the distance. He checked the parcel again. The writing had started to fill the space where an address would normally go. Directions stacked on directions, lines crossing and overlapping, as if the parcel had decided an address wasn't a place at all, but a series of correct choices. He heard the scribbling again and looked down as a new line formed. Almost there, don't run. He laughed once, short and thin. I'm not running, he said. I'm carrying a box that writes. The parcel stayed silent, which was for the best, because if it had answered him in plain speech, he would have sat down in the road and stayed there until morning. A pale shape appeared ahead. A cottage, set back from the lane, half hidden by gorse. Its whitewash was dull and cracked. The windows were dark. The roof sagged slightly, as if it had been thinking about collapsing for years and just hadn't found the time. Roddy slowed. The parcel grew very still in his arms. The writing stopped. He stepped up to the door and raised his hand. He knocked. For a moment there was nothing. The door opened slowly, as if whoever stood behind it had been standing there already and was only now deciding to be seen. An old man looked out. He was thin, with a face weathered by years and bad sleep. His eyes were sharp, his hair was white and close cropped. He wore a plain shirt and braces, and he looked like he'd stepped out of an older world and had been waiting at the edge of it for someone to arrive. The old man stared at Roddy with a look that wasn't surprise exactly. It was disbelief mixed with relief, like someone seeing a ship on the horizon after too many days. Roddy stared back. Something in the old man's face pulled at him, fair and unsettling, a familiarity he couldn't place. He cleared his throat. "I have a package for you," he said. The old man's gaze flicked to the parcel. He reached out slowly and took it as if it might bite. His fingers brushed Roddy's for a second. The old man's hand was cold. He nodded once. Roddy stood there, awkward now that the parcel was gone. The job had carried him this far and then suddenly stopped, leaving him with no script. "Well," Roddy said, "I better be off. My van broke down and I need to get home before it's full dark." The old man didn't speak. He just looked at him, studying him in a way that made Roddy feel like a letter being read. Then, very slowly, the old man nodded again. Roddy hesitated, waiting for something else. Nothing came. He turned and walked away from the cottage, the lane stretching back the way he'd come. He walked until the cottage was hidden behind the rise. Only then did he stop and look down at his hands. They were empty. He felt lighter, and that didn't feel like relief. He got back to the van much later, in full dark, guided by memory and stubbornness more than anything else. It started on the third try, like it had been sulking, and finally decided to stop. He drove home with the windows up and the radio off. For days afterward, he told nobody. He went to work, he delivered letters, he kept his cap clean, he waited for the parcel to appear again, as if it might turn up in the back of the van like a bad habit. It didn't. Then, in a pub a month later, someone asked him why he'd been so quiet lately, and he told the story in a rush, as if getting it out quickly would make it less strange. People laughed in the right places. They leaned in, they asked questions, they bought him pints. At first, it made him feel like he'd done something important. Then it became the story people wanted him to tell. He told it at weddings, he told it at wakes, he told it at Sunday dinners, half drunk, eyes shining, hands tracing the shape of the parcel in the air. He met a girl who liked the way he spoke about the road and the writing and the things he'd seen. She said it was charming. She said it made the world feel bigger. He married her. Years went by. He told the story again and again, and each time he told it, he listened to himself, waiting for the moment where he would feel certainty. He never did. He watched the faces around him change as he spoke. People stopped leaning in. They started glancing at the door. They smiled the way you smile at a man who has one song and keeps singing it. He tried to stop talking about it. He couldn't. It sat in him like a stone. It was the only part of his life that didn't fit the normal shape of things, and so he held it up to the light over and over as if he could finally see it clearly. His wife grew tired of it first. She didn't argue or shout. She just went quiet whenever he started, and the quiet lasted longer each time, until one day she packed a bag and left, as if she'd been waiting for a moment where she could do it without a scene. Roddy watched her go and felt a cold fear that had nothing to do with spiders or crying women in lanes. He was older by then, grey at the temples, hands rough from work. He moved into a small cottage of his own, away from town, away from people who looked at him like a man telling a tired tale. He sat alone at night and wondered if he'd made it all up. He remembered the scribbling sound. He remembered the ink appearing. He remembered the old man's face. He wondered if he'd been tired, if he'd been frightened, if his mind had filled the gaps with nonsense and then clung to it because it felt like magic. He thought of dying with that doubt in his head and felt sick with it. He wanted one thing, one sign. He didn't want an explanation. He didn't want a parade of ghosts at his door. He didn't want a new story to tell. He wanted proof that he hadn't been living a lie for 50 years. He went out one evening and stood by the hawthorn near his lane, the same kind of twisted tree he had once been warned not to touch. He didn't touch it now either. He just stood near it and spoke into the air, a voice low. "If it was real," he said, "just give me something small, something I can't deny." He went back inside and sat by the fire until it burned down. He slept in his chair, waking now and then to the sound of the house settling. Next day there came a knock on the door. It wasn't loud or urgent. The same measured knock Roddy Glynn had given on 100 doors in his life, learned early and never changed. He woke in his chair at once. The cottage was quiet, as it always was now. He opened the door, and there he was. His younger self stood exactly where he had stood 50 years earlier. Same long coat, same damp hair hanging into his face and loose strands. Same wary posture of someone new to the job, trying to stand straight while carrying something that felt heavier than it should. The same parcel sat under his arm, brown paper, twine tied, just so, red wax seal, unbroken. Roddy didn't blink. His younger self looked up, and for a moment there was a flicker in his eyes, not recognition or understanding, just the faint discomfort of looking at someone who felt familiar without reason. "I have a package for you," his younger self said. The words were identical, same tone, same careful politeness, as if he was looking back at himself on that very same day. Only he didn't know back then he was delivering to himself. Roddy nodded. He reached out and took the parcel. It felt the same as it always did, not heavy or light, certain. Their fingers touched, cold, then gone. His younger self hesitated, exactly as Roddy remembered doing, a half a second too long, a pause where the job should have been finished, but the world hadn't caught up yet. "Well," his younger self said, clearing his throat, "I better be off. Me van's broken down, and I need to get home before it gets full dark." Roddy said nothing. He only nodded again, the same way the old man nodded at him 50 years ago. His younger self shifted his weight, waiting for something else, a question, a comment, an explanation, and when none came, he accepted it the way people accept small oddities when they're already tired. He turned, he walked down the path. Roddy watched him go, standing in the doorway, parcel held against his chest. He watched until the lane dipped and the young man disappeared from view, heading back toward a van that would start on the third try, toward a life that would narrow and stretch and bend around a single day. Only then did Roddy close the door. He stood in the quiet cottage, the parcel warm in his hands, and felt the long ache of doubt finally loosen its grip. Outside, the morning light crept over the fields. The hawthorn stood where it always had, and the delivery was finally complete. As for what was inside the parcel itself, well, that's possibly a story for another time. The green light came on. Oscar Cantwell pressed the button. The press dropped with the same heavy sound it always made. The sheet metal under it flattened. The press lifted again. The green light went out. Oscar waited. The floor around him never truly went quiet. There were presses in other bays cycling at their own pace. There was grinding, there was metal being dragged, there was shouting now and again from somewhere down the line, the kind of shout that wasn't panic, only impatience. Oscar's station was the hydraulic press used for flattening stamped panels and offcuts before they went on to the next step. He wasn't the man cutting them, shaping them, measuring them. He wasn't trusted with that. His job sat at the bottom of the list. He watched the light. He pressed the button. He fed and cleared as instructed. He kept his eyes where they were meant to be and his eyes on the panel. The green light came on again. Oscar pressed the button. He sat on a low stool bolted to the concrete. The control box was in front of him at chest height, one green light, one button, a guarded stop switch off to the side covered like it belonged to somebody else. Fluorescent light washed the place flat. It made everyone's faces look tired, even when they weren't, and Oscar's hands were always marked with grey from the metal. The oil in the air stuck to everything, including skin. He washed his hands at the end of every day. The smell stayed anyway. A shadow fell across the panel. "Oscar Cantwell," a voice said. Oscar looked up. Liam Loughlin stood beside the press with the clipboard tucked under his arm. He was always clean. He didn't work the machines. He didn't lift. He didn't sweep. He walked the line and watched the men like they were parts on a shelf. "Yes," Oscar said. Liam glanced at the green light as if it might be lying. "You're slow," Liam said. "I'm pressing it," Oscar said. "You're sitting there staring," Liam replied. "You're sitting there like you're waiting for permission." Oscar kept his voice steady. "I'm watching the light." Liam looked down at him. "That light indicates readiness," he said. "It doesn't ask for your thoughts." Oscar nodded. Liam wrote something on his clipboard. "I'm going to say this once," Liam said. "Your job is the simplest job in the building. There's nowhere lower for you to fall. If you can't manage this, you'll have to accept what that means about you." Oscar didn't answer. He looked back to the panel. The green light came on. Oscar pressed the button. Liam watched the press cycle like he was judging Oscar's character by the speed of the metal. "There," Liam said. "It functions when you do." He walked off without another word. Oscar stayed where he was. He didn't move until the light came on again. He pressed the button. At the first break, Oscar drank tea from a mug that had lost its handle. He held it with both hands. The tea was weak. The sugar was lumpy. He sat alone because nobody was looking to share a bench with him this week. They weren't cruel about it. They just kept their space. People learned quickly what happened to men Liam didn't like. When the horn sounded, Oscar went back to the press. The green light came on. Oscar pressed the button. The shift ended. The men filed out into the yard. It was already dark. The city had a damp cold that sat in the clothes. Oscar's coat was thin. He had bought it second-hand, and the lining was torn. He kept telling himself he'd replace it. He kept not doing it. He missed the bus by seconds. The bus pulled away while he was still reaching the stop. He stood under the shelter and waited. 45 minutes. He watched the road. A car went past and threw dirty water onto the pavement. His trouser leg took it full. He didn't swear. He stood still and let it drip. When he got home, the hall light in his building was out again. He climbed the stairs in the dark, one hand on the wall. The damp smell was worse than usual. Someone had spilled something on the steps. He stepped in it and just kept going. His flat sat above a shop that never seemed open. The door stuck in the frame. He should have fixed it. He hadn't. He pushed it hard until it gave, and inside was one room and a small kitchen space. The wallpaper had peeled at the corners. The window didn't shut properly. He stuffed an old towel into the gap and told himself it was fine. The sink clinked. He'd set a bowl under it. The bowl was nearly full again. He ate some ham and brown bread he'd bought on the way home because he didn't trust it to last. He washed it down with tea. The kettle took longer than it should. When it finally boiled, it clicked off and then clicked back on by itself. He stared at it. He unplugged it at the wall. He lay down on the bed in his work clothes. He closed his eyes. He opened them again. He listened to voices through the wall, a couple arguing, a child crying, someone coughing, a radio playing low and tinny. He slept in scraps. He woke before the alarm, sweating, with his heart going too fast. He sat up and looked around the room like he was checking it was still his. He couldn't remember what he'd been dreaming. He only knew that he didn't want to go back into it. In the morning, his shoes were still wet from the night before. He put them on anyway. He went down the stairs. The hall light was still out. He stepped carefully. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the city still looked soaked. He walked to the bus stop and kept his eyes on the road. The bus arrived late. He got on and sat near the back. A man in a suit glanced at him and shoved his case away from the seat beside him. At the factory, the green light was already on when he sat down. Oscar pressed the button. "Close enough," Liam said from behind him. Oscar turned. "What?" "Close enough to late to be noted," Liam replied. "I wasn't late." Liam checked his watch as if it was the only thing in the world that told the truth. "You were close," Liam said. "It means you were careless, and careless men create problems." Oscar kept his voice even. "But the bus?" Liam raised his hand. "We do not bring excuses into this building. You arrive, you work, you leave. The rest of your life is not relevant to production." Oscar stared at him for a moment. Liam leaned in slightly. "Do you understand the words I'm using, or do you want me to simplify them for you?" "I understand." "Good," Liam said. "Keep it that way." He walked off. Oscar faced the panel again. The green light came on. Oscar pressed the button. Mid-morning, the feed belt hesitated. The metal slipped on the rollers. Oscar lifted his hand to signal. Liam arrived like he'd been waiting for a reason. "What is it?" "The belt's slipping," Oscar said. Liam watched it. The belt jerked and started moving again. "It's corrected," Liam said. It had stopped. "It is corrected," Liam repeated slowly. "The system corrected. That is what systems do. You don't understand systems." Oscar swallowed the reply he wanted to say and kept his mouth shut. Liam looked at him with a small smile. "That's a wise decision," he said. "Silence suits you." Oscar went back to watching the light. That afternoon, a stamped batch came back with a fault. Liam held up a panel in the air so the nearest man could see. This is unacceptable," Liam said. Oscar watched him without moving. Liam looked at him. "You were on the press." "I pressed when it was ready," Oscar said. Liam nodded once, as if Oscar had just admitted guilt. "You can press a button. Congratulations. The rest of the job is awareness. You lack it." A few men looked down at the floor. Liam lowered the panel and spoke in a calm voice that carried. "If anyone here is wondering what low standards looks like," he said, "look at that man who thinks pressing a button is the entire process." Oscar's face stayed blank. It was a skill he had learned. At home that night, his landlord knocked on the door, a man with a red nose and a greasy hat. "You're behind," the landlord said. Oscar kept his voice polite. "I paid last week." "You paid late," the landlord replied. "Late means behind. I want it on time." Oscar nodded. "I'll have it." The landlord pointed at the window with the towel stuffed in it. "And fix that. You're letting damp in." Oscar looked at the towel. "The frame's warped." "I don't care," the landlord said. "It's your flat while you're in it. You make it livable." He left without waiting for an answer. Oscar shut the door and leaned his head back against it. He stood there for a full minute before he moved. On Wednesday, a boy threw a stone at him on the street and ran off laughing. Oscar looked after him. He didn't chase or shout. He just kept walking. At work, Liam was in a better mood, which was worse. He came to Oscar's station and rested a hand on the control box like it belonged to him. "I've been thinking," Liam said. Oscar kept his eyes on the light. "That's a dangerous activity for you," Liam continued. "Thinking. It slows you down. It gives you confidence you haven't earned." Oscar stayed quiet. Liam glanced at the men nearby, then back to Oscar. "If you ever wonder why people don't like you," he said softly,
It's because you have the look of a man waiting for something else to carry him.
Oscar looked at him. Liam smiled.
That look, he said. There it is, confused and offended. That's your usual.
Oscar turned back to the panel. The green light came on. Oscar pressed the button. Later that day, Liam brought a new lad over to Oscar's station. The lad couldn't have been more than 19. He looked scared.
Stand there, Liam told the lad, and watch.
He pointed at Oscar.
This is what happens when a man gives up, Liam said. He becomes a chair. He becomes part of the machine.
Oscar kept pressing when the light came on. He didn't look at the lad. Liam spoke to the lad like Oscar wasn't there.
If you do your job well, you'll never end up like this.
The lad nodded quickly. Liam walked away with him. Oscar stayed on his stool. At home that night, the sink bowl overflowed while he slept. He woke to the sound of dripping. Water had spread across the floor. It ran under his bed. He got up and stood in it. He found a rag and started wiping. He wrung it into the bowl. The bowl filled again. He emptied it into the toilet. He came back. The water kept coming. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the sink like it was doing it on purpose. He knew it wasn't. He still stared. On Thursday morning, his bus didn't show. He waited 20 minutes, then 30. A man beside him shrugged and walked away. Oscar started walking too. It took him nearly an hour to get to the factory. He arrived breathless, coat damp, hair stuck down. Liam met him at the entrance.
You've made a spectacle of yourself, Liam said.
Oscar tried to speak. No words came. Liam looked him up and down.
Look at you, like a stray dog.
Oscar's jaw clenched. Liam noticed.
There it is again, that little bit of pride. Get rid of it. Pride doesn't suit you, lad.
Oscar moved to his station. The green light came on. Oscar pressed the button. The day dragged. Oscar's hands shook slightly when he lifted off cuts. It wasn't fear. It was tiredness, the kind that got into the bones. Mid-afternoon, the green light flickered during a cycle. It didn't stay steady. It flashed and dimmed. Oscar watched it. He didn't press. Liam appeared.
What are you waiting for?
He said, sharper than usual. The light, it's not steady, Oscar replied. Liam stared at him like Oscar had spoken in another language.
I'll explain this, Liam said, and I will not repeat myself. That light tells you when to press. You do not interpret. You do not second guess it. Your job is to comply.
Oscar kept his voice quiet. The machine hesitated yesterday too. Liam leaned in close.
You do not diagnose, he said. You are not qualified. You are barely employed.
Oscar looked at the light again. It steadied. Oscar pressed the button. The press came down. The sound was harsh. Metal scraped in a way it hadn't before. Oscar's eyes stayed on the panel. When the cycle finished, he saw Liam watching him. Liam wrote something on his clipboard. Oscar felt the back of his neck go hot. He said nothing. He pressed the light when it came on. He waited when it went down. That night, Oscar's landlord knocked again, harder this time. "You're making trouble," the landlord said. "I'm not," Oscar replied. "You're behind," the landlord said again. "And there's water damage now. The shop owner's complaining." Oscar looked down. It's the sink." "I don't care," the landlord said. "If you can't keep a place dry, you can't keep it. I want the money on Friday, all of it." Oscar nodded. The landlord walked away. Oscar shut the door. He sat on the bed. He didn't take off his shoes. He stayed like that until it was too late to do anything about it. Friday morning, he sold his old watch for a few pounds to a man near the market. The man turned it over, frowned, and offered less than what it was worth. Oscar took it anyway. He paid the landlord. The landlord counted it slowly and smirked. Goodbye, the landlord said. Oscar went to work. The green light came on. Oscar pressed the button. By midday, the machine hesitated again. It stopped mid-cycle for a second and resumed. The green light flickered. A warning light on the side panel blinked once and went out. Oscar raised his hand. Liam arrived fast.
What?
Liam said.
The press stopped,
Oscar said. Liam looked at the machine as if it had personally betrayed him, then back at Oscar.
What did you do?
I pressed it when it was ready.
You always say that, Liam replied, like you're proud of it or something.
I did what you told me, Liam. Liam stared at him.
Do you enjoy creating problems? He asked.
Oscar said nothing. Liam turned and walked away, calling to another supervisor that the line was behind because of Cantwell. Oscar heard his name carried across the floor like a stain. The afternoon got worse. The press cycled, then stopped. It didn't resume. The green light went dark. The noise on the floor changed as other men stopped to look. A few presses shut down. Someone swore. Liam arrived with two other men. He didn't shout. His calm was more dangerous than noise.
Step away,
he told Oscar. Oscar stood. He moved back. Liam pointed at the control box.
This man here,
he said to the others,
cannot manage one light and one button.
Oscar's hands hung at his side. Liam looked at him.
Say it,
Liam said. Oscar didn't understand.
Say you broke it,
Liam said, voice quiet.
Say it out loud.
Oscar's mouth opened. He closed it. Liam watched him like he was waiting for a machine to start.
Say it,
Liam repeated. Oscar's voice came out flat. I broke it. Liam nodded, satisfied.
There, now we can proceed with facts.
He waved Oscar further back.
Stand there, stand where I can see you.
Oscar stood. Liam leaned into the press housing, peering at the jammed metal and the misaligned plate. He muttered to himself as he looked. His shoulders blocked part of the opening. One of the other men offered a suggestion. Liam ignored it. He spoke loudly for Oscar to hear.
This is what happens when you keep a useless man in a role that requires attention.
Oscar didn't react. His face stayed blank because it had been blank all week. Liam pushed his head farther in.
Look at the state of this. I think you did this on purpose.
Oscar stared at the green light. It flickered once. Then it came on. Then Liam said from inside the machine,
Oscar Cantwell, the useless fool who can't even press a button.
Oscar looked at the light. He reached out his finger and he pressed. 2 5-liter bottles of bleach, 3 black sacks, 2 wire brushes, 10 linen cloths. That's what it took to clean up what was left of Liam Loughlin. Oscar Cantwell was taken away quietly. 2 men led him out through the yard. His hands were cuffed. His face stayed blank. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He looked straight ahead and walked like a man who was going to a bus stop. When you wake in the morning, please like, subscribe, and maybe leave me a small comment. Tell me where you're listening from, perhaps. Those quiet words and clicks are what keep this channel alive. The soft signs that let the stories return again and again to you and to others who might like to find these stories. Come back every night. Let this be your resting place. Good night.